Welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Danny Cannell, that's Bud Elliott, that's Tom Fornelli. I'm Chip Patterson coming to you live on CBS Sports Network. Lots to get to over the course of the next hour, including our Heisman Trophy picks, our Heisman Trophy value plays, some starting quarterback announcements that have our attention, and so much more. But gentlemen, we begin with the finish line. I know that's a strange thing to say as we're about to start the season, but this is the finish line. It was 226 days from when Michigan beat Washington in the national championship game to when we kick off the season. So we've almost done it, because this Saturday, the 2024 season will begin, and it will begin with Florida State and Georgia Tech in Dublin. It's not the only game of the day. We'll also get a look at the beginning of the Bronco Mendenhall era at New Mexico as they take on Montana State. On CBS Sports Network, this fine channel you're watching right now, we'll have SMU and Nevada. And while Delaware State is currently dealing with travel issues, the plan is that they will be playing Hawaii to cap off the night. So let's begin with the Seminoles and the Yellow Jackets. And y'all know we got to check in with our resident Noles here. So Danny first, then Bud. Danny Cannell, what are you looking to see from the 2024 edition of the Florida State Seminoles when they take the field?
Chip, I will easily say this is the most excited I've been for a week zero in the history of week zeros. I don't know how long we've had them, but this does feel like a really good game. We've got a conference matchup. We've got Florida State, my alma mater, playing, trying to put last year in the rear view as far as they possibly can. So I'm looking for a new look Seminole team, and I would like to see them control both lines of scrimmage. Like, that's what I'm looking for. Sure, a lot of eyes are going to be on DJU. What does he look like at quarterback? What are some of these receivers that have to replace guys like Keon Coleman? What are they going to look like? But I'm probably most excited about the lines of scrimmage. The offensive line has a ton of experience back. I think they're going to run the ball a ton. The defensive line could be one of the best in the ACC, if not the entire country. So I would like to see them control the lines of scrimmage. And yet, I know this game is not going to be a walkover for Florida State. Georgia Tech is a tough out that they're going to have to go out there and establish that line of scrimmage. And if they do, I think they'll be fine. If they struggle there, that could provide some problems around. But I'm looking forward to seeing this new look Florida State team. And I want to see them, I don't want them to dwell on what happened last year, getting left out and getting smoked in the Orange Bowl. But I would like to see them kind of reestablish themselves and say, you know what, this may be a new team, but we're still a national championship contender.
Danny, exactly. I kind of want to see if Florida State is still like at the top of the ACC. They're clearly not as good as they were last year, but can they still be dominant over some of these sort of, mid and lower level teams in this league? I agree with you fully. I think it's a heavy run game for them. If they do get behind, I think if you're a Nole, that's where you get scared. Reports out of practice have been the passing game looks pretty rough, so I would expect a lot of run game Florida State. They do feel very confident on defense, though. The defensive line has a lot of nice pieces. Patrick Payton, Marvin Jones Jr., and I think they really have one of the best secondary combos in the country.
Tom, when we're eyeing this matchup, well, I was going to say, Tom, when we're eyeing this matchup, how do you start picking it apart in terms of trying to figure out how we're going to judge Florida State moving forward? They're a top 10 team. We're expecting them to be in the mix for the college football playoff invitational. So what are you looking to see out of them?
The most interesting aspect that I'm looking forward to seeing from the Seminoles in this game, which, it's just the first of many they'll be playing, but the primary reason the Seminoles got left out of the playoff last year, the excuse that was given was Jordan Travis was injured, and people did not feel like this team could compete without their starting quarterback. Well, Jordan Travis is gone now, and in his place is DJ Uiagalelei, who is transferred in from Oregon State, but there's plenty of familiarity there with him at Florida State from his time at Clemson. I want to see what this passing offense is going to look like with DJU, because while Jordan Travis is not what I would ever consider to be the prototype quarterback as far as what you look at from an NFL perspective in the passing game, I think he was, or at least he offered a bit more vertically down the field passing than what you're going to get from DJU. So with the new players at receiver, replacing those guys with the new quarterback, Mike Norvell, throughout his entire career, has done an incredible job of molding his offense to the personnel that he has available to him. So I'm really interested in seeing what this Florida State offense is going to look like with the new version of DJU in this receiving core.
Okay, Tom, you get first word here. We can hear from our Seminoles. Let me get them. We can hear from our Seminoles here in a bit. They're not listening right now. Okay, so if Georgia Tech is going to win this game, and look, we've seen, the line on this game has slowly been trickling down a little bit, but Florida State is still a notable and sizable favorite. But games in Ireland, Penn State edges out UCF 26-24. Georgia Tech squeaks by Boston College 17-14. Northwestern did not win a game in the United States in 2022, but they beat Nebraska 31-28. If Georgia Tech is going to pull off the upset as a double-digit underdog, how do you think it happens?
Yeah, it's that first game of the season where you tend to see a lot of weird and odd results because unlike the NFL, there's no preseason in college football. You don't have training camp scrimmages against other programs. This is the first time you're lining up on the field against an opponent that is not your own teammate. So weird stuff can happen. And I think if you're Georgia Tech, the one thing you need to rely on here is you've got to force turnovers. I think that if you just line up and play straight up against Florida State, you're going to get beat 9 times out of 10. But if you can cause some chaos, cause some, mistakes, get DJU to cough up the football, you'll give yourself a chance to win this game in the fourth quarter. And maybe, who knows, maybe Mike Norvell will forget to just kneel the ball in the final minute of the game and give Georgia Tech the ball back, and you can throw a touchdown in the last second to pull off the upset. But I do think this is a Georgia Tech team that is going to be improved from what we saw last year. But I think if they win this game, it's going to be more for the mistakes Florida State makes than anything Georgia Tech does.
All right, Bud first, then Danny. When we're looking at Georgia Tech, we know that they've got an explosive offense. They've got places where they need to improve. They've got a new defensive coordinator in here, an old Mike Elko guy. We saw that Duke defense come out season opener, hair on fire against Clemson. Bud, when you're looking at this matchup, if things were to go the way of the Yellow Jackets, and then Danny, want to hear from you after that, how do you think it happens?
Chip, I think it really is dependent on game script. I don't think Georgia Tech has a real good chance of coming back in this game. If they can jump out to an early lead and make Florida State play from behind, where the run game and some of the play action stuff does not have to be honored quite as much by Georgia Tech, I think that's really the key. How does Georgia Tech hit explosive plays against FSU? I think for the most part, it would have to come via miscommunications, via a lot of new parts on Florida State's defense. They're talented. They haven't played together a whole lot. If they bust some and give us some explosive plays, get down early, then I think Georgia Tech could absolutely pull the upset.
Remember last year at Boston College, Florida State almost lost that game. And that was a game they were favored by more points. They probably had more talent edge than they had in this one. But a young Castellanos was running around making plays. I mean, that is one thing, no matter if you have the edge on the defensive line and you can get after a quarterback, if you've got him trapped and he makes something out of nothing, that can be a massive problem. Haynes King is pretty athletic, and he can get outside the pocket. He can extend plays and make a secondary that's really good, make them cover longer, makes them look average. So I think Haynes King is somebody that would make me a little bit nervous, that you want to try to keep him in the pocket, that you don't let him extend plays, make plays off the cuff. And then, Chip, what you mentioned about the defense, too. If they can force DJU into, some errors, a pick six, something early in the game to maybe knock his confidence somewhat, that makes me nervous as well. The longer this game is close, the more it favors Georgia Tech, because then Florida State, doubts start to creep in. You're the favorite. You're supposed to win. You're supposed to, all the things we talked about last year, those, clouds start to creep up. So I think Florida State needs to take control of this game early from the start. If it's a close game in the fourth quarter, that makes me significantly worried as a Florida State fan.
Yeah, we got 12 p.m. Eastern time for the kickoff there in Ireland. A big old rugby stadium. Going to have a lot of college football fans in it, so it should be a really good time. But then in Reno at 8 p.m. Eastern time, our very own Amanda Guerra, the GOAT, will be on the call for SMU at Nevada. Now, it is going to be the ACC debut for Rhett Lashley and the SMU Mustangs. You see, they are heavy favorites in that game. Danny, do you think that SMU is going to be able to come out in a game where they are expected to win by a lot, but they are playing on the road? Are you looking at SMU in a way where you're going to judge them based on their ability to meet the expectations against a Wolfpack team now led by Jeff Choate?
I do. I mean, if you're asking if they're cover or not, I'm not sure about that, but I do think they'll be impressive. I mean, Preston Stone has played a lot of football in this system. I know he missed the spring and he's coming back off an injury, but I feel like he'll be full health. Talking about establishing the lines of scrimmage, SMU, for a team that is, making that jump, Rhett Lashley is very well aware of what the gap is between the conference he was in the American and the conference he's coming to in the ACC, and they've addressed that in the transfer portal. Now, I think it takes some time to get the depth and a long season to be able to keep up with the teams that have already been in a Power 4 conference. But in a game like this, to start off the year, I think there's a ton of enthusiasm. They'll be fresh. I think they'll be able to control the line of scrimmage, and they'll be able to control this game against a program which has really been struggling the last couple of years. So I would expect SMU to live up to the expectations. They're a very trendy pick to finish in the top third, top quarter of the ACC. It depends on who you talk to. But I think they'll look the part and they'll look impressive week 0.
Yeah, I'm looking at this game from SMU, and the only thing I would take from the result of this game is if it's close. Then I would be a little bit concerned about the Mustangs going into the rest of the regular season against the ACC. But as you saw, they're 4 touchdown favorites, and they're 4 touchdown favorites on the road for a reason. This is a Nevada program that the last couple of years has struggled mightily, and this is something that SMU should be able to walk in with the talent that they have and with the expectations that they have for the season. They should steamroll the Wolfpack in this game. And if they don't, then it becomes something of a concern. But if they win by 40 or 50, I don't think that means anything. I think that just means SMU went out and took care of business.
I agree with Tom on that. I want to see SMU look crisp, and I want to judge SMU kind of against SMU and against expectations. Nevada is really a terrible team. Their quarterback's out with an injury. Their receiving core is, for my money at least, the worst in all of college football. And we know that SMU does like to run it up in these spots. If you recall last year, they went to basically a dead team walking in Temple, laid 20-something on the road, and won 55-0. So Lashley's an offensive coach. He is the guy I think that really cares about his offense's numbers. I would expect him to pour it on if he can. And they're going to play both quarterbacks here. Both Stone and Jennings, they announced, will play.
Great call there. There's going to be a lot of spots where in these games, especially a lot of them, one team's going to be heavily favored. You're going to see the backup quarterback get a lot of run, and you're not just making them hand off because the coaches are trying to continue the evaluation period of seeing how these guys do in live action. It's a reason why when Will Howard comes off the field for Ohio State Akron, we're still going to be watching because they're not going to have the backups just handing it off as well. A great point, Bud, as we look ahead to that. Well, speaking of quarterback battles, coming up on the other side, we've got some quarterback battles that have come to an end, at least for week 1. Who are some of the recent starting quarterbacks that have been announced as the week 1 starter that have our attention? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. One of the big sort of newsy items that just continues to get us going all the way to the kickoff of the season are the teams that have had quarterback competitions, ending them, naming a starter for week 1. So we've had some notable ones. We want to go around the horn here and spotlight some that have our attention. And Danny, let's begin with USC, where we had Lincoln Riley with us on CBS Sports Network. We had Miller Moss with us on CBS Sports Network. But at the time, he was stopping short of naming him QB1 for the year. That has now come to a close. Miller Moss is going to be the starting quarterback. What are you looking for? What are your expectations now that the news is final?
I mean, go find a quarterback in any system that Lincoln Riley has been the mastermind behind, and he's put up big numbers. So maybe that was the toughest part of the job, was just winning the starting quarterback battle. But even looking back at what he did in the bowl game with the 6-touchdown performance, clearly he's got a grasp of the system and he knows where to go with the football. He's going to have talent around him. So I would expect Miller Moss to put up big numbers in the system with guys like Zachariah Branch, Mekhi Lemon, a backfield that's deep, an offensive line that's pretty good. Like, that is not the concern for me that I have at all with Miller Moss at the helm at USC. The questions revolve around that defense. So I would expect Lincoln Riley, the guy who's the quarterback guru, that he's got his man, that he would put up big numbers. And if he doesn't, I wouldn't expect him rather quickly to make the change to Jaden Maeva, the transfer from UNLV. But from what we saw, Miller Moss handled himself like a seasoned veteran, almost franchise quarterback would. So I was not surprised by this announcement. I would expect he'd put up big numbers.
Yeah, and also he uses Bowling Green for his NCAA 25 dynasty, so he's not one of these front runners. He understands what it's like to overcome adversity. Tom, we have looked at Toledo for a long time as being the place where we find some of the most talent in the MAC. And this past offseason, I mean, it's not great for Jason Candle, but it's good for UCF and it's good for Baylor that some of those most talented players are now making the jump to Power Conference team. Baylor has named DeQuan Finn as the starting quarterback. I know that, everyone's into their MACtion and everyone throws themselves at being able to watch that late in the year, but you've been a big fan of Finn for a long time. What should Baylor fans and college football fans be expecting with him at the helm there in Waco?
Yeah, I thought Finn heading to Baylor in the portal this offseason was one of the more intriguing and kind of under the radar moves out there because, like you said, from watching Finn the last few years at Toledo, there's a lot to like. I don't think that when you watch him play, he is somebody who is what you would consider the prototypical pocket passer, laser arm, tremendous accuracy guy. But he does have a strong arm, and although the accuracy can be hit or miss at times, he can make most throws occasionally. But what I really love about him is with his size. Despite it, you look at him and you don't think he can move very well, but he can move around. He's not a statue. He's got good athleticism. He's very difficult to bring down. Like, if you're an undersized defensive back and DeQuan Finn is coming at you, it's not going to be a good time for you. I would try to get as low as possible and hope for the best. But I think bringing that kind of option to a Baylor offense that last year, honestly, I thought was a bit too static, and I think that really hindered what they were able to do. And when you combined it with a defense that was underperforming, it led to a pretty disappointing season for the Bears. So now you come in with Dave Aranda kind of on a hot seat and everybody kind of overlooking Baylor in a conference in which you look at from top to bottom and you really don't know who the best team is because it is that close. There is so much parity in the Big 12. If DeQuan Finn hits and is as good of a player as he was at Toledo at Baylor, this is a team that I'm not going to sit here and say can win a Big 12 title, but I do think they can get back to a bowl game and they could make some noise in the Big 12 and perhaps have a say in who does end up winning the league.
Yeah, don't send a defender with a jersey number in the 20s at DeQuan Finn. I don't think it's going to end well for the defender right there. But we have talked on the Cover 3 podcast about how Scott Satterfield in this offseason, voiced a little bit of even regret, just thought that he didn't necessarily handle that year one at Cincinnati well. He did not say this. So, Scott, don't text me about this one, but you have offered, and I agree, probably got quarterback wrong. So now here going into year two, Cincinnati has named Brendan Sorsby as the starting quarterback. What are your thoughts there in terms of what the Bearcats are going to get at the quarterback position in 2024?
You think they might have got quarterback wrong? I mean, Emory Jones was a straight disaster for them last year. Look, I think that almost anybody available in the portal at the P4 level would have been an upgrade over Emory Jones. But I also think that Brendan Sorsby actually is better than just anybody that they could have gone and gotten. I liked in the limited sample what he did at Indiana. I think he can be a little bit similar to kind of a toned down like Malik Cunningham, if you recall Scott Satterfield's days at Louisville. Cincinnati does return basically every single person who played offensive line for them last year. They have some interesting weapons at receiver. They have an excellent back in Kiner. So Sorsby won't be asked to be a superhero, but if he can just manage the offense, chuck it around a little bit, use the mobility, don't play as poorly as Jones did, I actually think Cincinnati has an outside chance to threaten for a bowl game, and they're going to be pretty good at running the ball too.
Yep. Other ones that stood out, Duke has named Malik Murphy as the starter for week one. I think that you don't go get Texas's old quarterback and expect him to ride the pine behind Henry Beelan IX and Grayson Loftus. Much love to Henry and Grayson. I just think that you got to give Malik Murphy the chance out there. Arizona State has named Sam Leavitt as the starting quarterback. And the one that would stand out there is that who didn't win the job, that would be Jeff Sims of Georgia Tech and Nebraska infamy. So he will start the year running with the twos there for Kenny Dillingham. Well, there are a few names here that, they had to battle for the job. But most of the Heisman Trophy favorites, they've had this thing locked in. And that's why they're at the top of the odds board. So it's time for us to make some picks. Coming up on the other side, we give you our Heisman Trophy selections and long shot value plays for 2024. Next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. We've got only a little bit of time to get in those preseason picks. We're all being peppered with them. Who's going to win the title? Who's going to win this? And we want to know who's going to win the Heisman Trophy. It can be very simple. Sometimes it's somebody at the top of the board. Sometimes somebody comes out of nowhere and you were holding on to that ticket the whole time. So let's do a little bit of both. Let's just start with your straight up pick. Bud, I want you to lead us off. Then let's go Danny and Tom after that. Bud, when you're looking at this board and you're imagining the 2024 season, your Bud Bot is running all the systems. You're doing the Monte Carlo sim, the Monte Cristo sim. Who do you think is going to win the Heisman Trophy?
I'm going to go with Dylan Gabriel. With a sort of medium to good season, Gabriel will become the NCAA's all-time leading passer. I project Oregon to be in the Big Ten championship game, which means their record is probably going to be 12-0, 11-1, or 10-2. So certainly the Oregon will have the record that voters would feel good voting for. I also just don't think most of the other quarterbacks out there who are known commodities are actually all that good. So I know it's chalk, but I'll go ahead and take Gabriel here if I have to pick a favorite.
I'm with you, Bud. I went with the same one. I don't love it. I wish I had gone somebody else, but I do think this is as wide open as we've seen. Even for a favorite, I don't feel great about it, but I'm like, all right, let me see if I can make the case for him. He's going to put up monster numbers in Will Stein's system. He's got great talent around him. I think worst case scenario is 10-2, so they're a virtual lock for the college football playoff. So you got stat machine, national title contender at the quarterback position. That's been a formula that's worked. And I know the expansion of the 12-team playoff could change some things, but I don't think it's going to change dramatically the way the Heisman Trophy works. So I'll go with Dylan Gabriel as well. He's got the brand behind him. And if he could lead Oregon or have them on the verge of a first national championship, I think that helps him even more. Already has great brand recognition. He's great with the media. Getting to sit down with him in Indianapolis. He's got a great smile. All the stuff that really shouldn't matter, but it kind of does. Dylan Gabriel's got it, so I'll go with him.
Wow, don't both of you go out on such a far limb there by taking the favorite to win the Heisman. But you say that the reason you're taking Gabriel is because of all the options. There isn't really a proven commodity, and I think that's why Dylan Gabriel is the favorite. I don't think that means Dylan Gabriel is the best quarterback, so I'm going to take an unproven commodity, but somebody I believe very much in who I think is going to have a fantastic season. I'm talking about my boy, the Tennessee Volunteers quarterback, Nico Iamaleava. This is a former five-star quarterback who got a giant bag to come all the way out to Knoxville from California to play quarterback, but it makes plenty of sense because he's a very talented player and he's stepping into an offense that has been one of the most explosive and productive offenses in the country the last few years. We saw what it did with Hendon Hooker, a guy who could not really get anything done at Virginia Tech, suddenly comes to Tennessee. Now he's an NFL quarterback. Joe Milton and his rocket arm that failed to produce anywhere else comes to Tennessee. He puts up good numbers. Now you get an actual five-star talent into Josh Heupel's system behind that offensive line with those weapons. Nico is going to have a monster season. Tennessee will therefore be in the college football playoff race. And we all know if you're going to win the Heisman Trophy in this modern age, you have to be a quarterback and you have to be playing on a team that has national title hopes. Nico checks all those boxes. He will have the numbers. He will be on the good team. He will get the votes and he will win the Heisman Trophy.
Ooh, okay. So I can kind of split the difference between you two here because I'm actually going with the player who has, of last year's Heisman Trophy voting, players that are back, no one had more votes than Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe was on 57 ballots for the Heisman Trophy last year. They weren't all first place, but do you know who got more than 200 first place votes? The quarterback for his new head coach. Yeah, I think that Jalen Milroe is going to get better offensive coaching with Kalen DeBoer at the helm than he got last year when he was 6th place in the Heisman Trophy voting, showing up on 57 different ballots. And I think that what Michael Penix Jr. got from the leadership of Kalen DeBoer and from the offense put together by Kalen DeBoer, I think that is going to lead to a very big season for Jalen Milroe. So he's already in the mind of a lot of Heisman Trophy voters, and then I don't think he needs to have Alabama number 1 or number 2 in the country. I think a 10-win season would be enough for Alabama to be in the mix for the playoff and for Jalen Milroe to be in the mix for a Heisman Trophy. So with his ability to run the football, with the ways that I think he's set up for a statistical improvement throwing the football, I like going with the Alabama quarterback Jalen Milroe as my selection to win the Heisman Trophy. I gave you all those names at the top of the board, but what about a little bit lower? What if you work your way down to some value plays? Danny, where we finding some value in the Heisman odds market?
We've been a little SEC Big Ten heavy here, so I'm going to go and look at one of the other forgotten about conferences in the Big 12, and a team and a player that everyone's forgotten. It seems he's part of college football because he did miss all of last season. I'm going with Cam Rising at Utah. They're the favorites to win the Big 12. I think if you were going to pick a Power 4 conference winner, which one you'd feel most confident about, I would put my money on Utah. And then so you're in that national conversation for the playoff picture. He's a dynamic playmaker, too, who always has lived up to the moment. I worry somewhat about the statistical, just gaudy stats, if he's going to have 4,000 passing yards. But I do think he lives for the moment. And don't forget, he beat Caleb Williams not once but twice. Caleb Williams' year that he won the Heisman Trophy. I think he's more than capable of it. He's got the recognition, and I think he's going to win the Big 12. So I'll put Cam Rising in there at 30-1.
Danny showing that Gen X solidarity by taking the only Generation X quarterback still playing college football in Cam Rising. I'm going to go, I took Nico as my favorite. I wanted to find a guy with upside who maybe hasn't proven it yet at this level, and I'm going to take that same kind of path for my value play. I'm going to Oklahoma, and I'm taking Jackson Arnold, a player who, you guys both took Dylan Gabriel to win the Heisman as your pick. The reason Dylan Gabriel is no longer at Oklahoma is because the coaching staff down there felt pretty dang good about the guy behind him on the depth chart last year. Jackson Arnold is going to get his shot at the starting gig this season. And, it's not exactly a stretch of the imagination to imagine an Oklahoma quarterback winning the Heisman Trophy. They've done it quite a few times lately, and I know Lincoln Riley was the head coach when they did it the last few times, but this is still a team that I think is going to come in the SEC and surprise some people and be a bit more competitive than most think, and I think Jackson Arnold's going to put up big numbers, so if they reach their ceiling, I like Arnold as kind of like a long shot value.
Yeah, building off that, I'll just take the quarterback or the coach who delivered some of those Heisman trophies there in Norman. So we talked earlier in the hour about Miller Moss, getting the job and what that could mean for USC's offense. We're talking value here. What if it goes really, really well and he goes out there and he's able to exceed expectations? And I think the word expectations is important because right now there are not high expectations for USC. So maybe if everything goes right for the Trojans, let's say they have a stunner there when they're on CBS playing against Michigan on the massive stage on America's Most Watched Network, and Miller Moss defeats one of the best defenses in the country. Well, let's say that at the end of the year, Miller Moss is getting Notre Dame booted from the playoff picture with another big win. These big stage victories could still be there. The Trojans' win total is 7.5. If USC is a 9-10 win team and Miller Moss is the reason, it does not take a Heisman voter's brain long to be like, Lincoln Riley quarterback, Heisman Trophy. I mean, that's peanut butter and jelly, y'all. I think that we could see a place where because of the low expectations and the familiarity with Lincoln Riley quarterbacks, that we do end up with a Miller Moss. Again, it's not my number one pick, but especially now that he's named the starter, I could see it being a good value at this price. Now, Danny's pick, Tom's pick, and my pick, we're all about in the same price range. Technically long shot, technically value. Then there's the pick submitted by Bud Elliott, which, if it does cash, is one of those, if John Cougar Mellencamp ever wins an Oscar, I'm going to be a very rich man type scenarios. Okay, so Bud, please tell us your pick and exactly, how you see this potentially playing out.
All right, Chip. So before I give it to you, I did want to go with Garrett Nussmeier, but to be honest, betting him at 18-1 when you could take Nussmeier, and I have at 50, 55, and 60-1 to go first overall, just doesn't make a lot of sense because voters oftentimes don't like double dipping from the same school, and they just went to LSU last year for Jaden Daniels. So I don't think Nussmeier is a terrible value, but I'd rather just play him to go first overall in the draft. I mean, the email said long shots, right? So I don't know if you guys missed the SEO webinar and the social media webinar, but as we say on the show, Arch Manning, Arch Manning, Arch Manning, Arch Manning. This is a voting award. Voters want a narrative, okay? If Quinn Ewers goes down early in the season, and he does have a pretty extensive injury history, Arch Manning is the next man up. I said the word Manning. Yes, Arch Manning. And I think he would play really well in that offense. I think he's probably the top backup quarterback in the country. So 120-1, I don't love a lot of these long shots. Let's go with a really long shot, maybe just some pizza money on it. And obviously, I hope Quinn Ewers does not get hurt early in the season. But if he does, I think Texas would actually be okay.
Oh, man, no. If you want to talk about narrative, it would be the Manning family revenge on the Heisman Trophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's able to go and secure the stiff arm trophy. Ooh, what that would mean for Thanksgiving.
Saved the day.
Oh,
man,
I just
saved the day when the Heisman, yeah.
It's there. It's right there. You know, it's all there. Again, wish nothing but full health and a good season for Quinn Ewers so the Arch can come in without the kind of dramatics. But if the dramatics are there, the narrative would be as well. Well, coming up on the other side, we've got some coaches that are going to be making their debut at a new school, the first-year coaches for 2024. But which of these coaches are set up for a good start to the season? We'll get into all that and more next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. Now, I've often thought to myself, if I was going into my very first year at a new school, would you rather start hot? Would you rather finish strong? And I think it's not even a debate, because the last thing you want at your first year at a new school is to all of a sudden have all those fans thinking, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. Like, you want to be able to give some confidence, even if maybe it's fleeting. So let's think about who of the first-year coaches have everything set up to get good vibes going, good start to their tenure. Let's go, Bud, first. Who do you have your eyes on?
Well, Chip, I'm looking at Mike Elko at Texas A&M. They have a real opportunity in week one as they host Notre Dame to really put themselves on the map. And I think Elko kind of has to win in year one because, at least as I project it, I think their roster will be worse next year. He has a lot of really talented veteran players that Jimbo Fisher left over that, granted, that Jimbo did not utilize them correctly, but A&M is in the very short list conversation for the best defensive line in the country. He has a veteran quarterback in Connor Wegman, who, if he stays healthy, really could make some noise, and the offensive line, should be okay. I think much like Jeff Brom, he inherited a bunch last year at Louisville. He had the schedule to come out and win. Elko's in a very similar spot. He had better hit the ground running there because next year the schedule's tougher, and I think the roster's probably worse.
Chip, you made the point about what type of first year do you want to have. I'm going to look at it from the perspective of what type of program do you want to take over. And I want to take over one that's battered, bruised, and broke from paying out the previous coach's buyout so that you come in there and an 8-win season, they will celebrate the same way they did when they ran out other coaches that were 8 or 9-win seasons. And I think that's what Mike Elko is going to give them. I totally agree with Bud. I mean, they're still one of the teams that's on Bud's blue chip ratio with a, made up of more than 4 and 5, 50% of the roster of 4 and 5-star athletes. Connor Wigman, if he stays healthy, that's going to be a crucial part to this. But I love the Colin Klein hire to kind of utilize his skill set within that system. I think they need more of a workman-like, kind of boring approach to the game and to the sport, which has been a perfect offseason for Elko. You haven't heard any, off-field issues. You haven't seen to run too many guys off the team. A lot of those players that were problem children at Texas A&M earlier have already been run off from the program. So I think he's got a team that's hungry, a fan base that's hungry. It's hungry as well. And I think they're going to do really well this first year, including potentially making the college football playoff and the 12-team expanded playoff this year.
Yeah, they beat Notre Dame. I mean, it's set up to be able to just stack a lot of wins early in the season. Tom, you've got us in a spot where there is a coach who's taking over a great scenario. There will be challenges early. So who do you have your eye on? First-year head coach with a good chance to start strong.
Yeah, earlier in the show, I was making fun of Danny and Bud for going with the favorite to win the Heisman. And now here I am a couple minutes later saying, I think the first-year coach in the best situation is the one inheriting the reigning national champion Michigan Wolverines, Sharon Moore. I think that obviously there are challenges. You mentioned it, Chip. Jim Harbaugh is gone. He took a large chunk of the coaching staff with him. Sharon Moore is now officially a first-time head coach, although thanks to Jim Harbaugh's suspensions last year, Sharon was able to coach a few games on his own as a sideline last season. You know, picked up some wins against Penn State and Ohio State, which most Big Ten coaches on the sidelines haven't done in their entire careers. And they have a lot to replace on offense, including their first-round pick at quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, and pretty much the entire offensive line. But they still have a tremendous defense filled with 3 guys who could be first-round picks. In fact, 2 of them might be top 5 picks come next spring. You don't know with Will Johnson and Mason Graham. And I think that offensive line-wise, yes, there's a lot to replace. But where did Sharon Moore make his bones as a coach? Coaching the offensive line. I have faith and confidence in him to put that unit together and to be solid. And besides, that was a unit that dealt with a bunch of injuries last year to begin with, and they were still able to put together a solid offense. And then the quarterback, they have Alex Orji, who, if you know, the word coming out of camp in these last few weeks before the season starts is that they are very happy with the progress he is showing as a passer, and we know he can run. So if he gives them a bit of a two-way threat, this offense suddenly becomes very dangerous. And then I think the final piece here for Sharon, let's look at the Big Ten as a total. You've got Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State. Those are the 4 teams you feel good about. After that, there are a lot of question marks and iffy soft spots. I think at worst, Michigan with their schedule, even with those tough games, this is a team that's probably going to win 9 games and will be competing for a playoff spot. So I think Sharon's in a terrific position going into his first year as a head coach.
There's no shortage of daunting opponents, but only 4 road games for Michigan in 2024.
It helps.
So you get to do it right there in the big house. Okay, so we've got Michigan, obviously college football playoff, Big Ten title expectations. Texas A&M could be in the college football playoff. I am not going with the team with any college football playoff expectations. No, Fran Brown, year 1 at Syracuse, really just needs to get the Orange into the postseason, show some positive momentum, and I love the way that the schedule sets up so that he can put some money in the bank, so to speak. Because I think that depending on how you feel about that Georgia Tech game, or maybe at UNLV, which is going to be in Allegiant Stadium, I think Syracuse is favored in the first 5 games of the season. If they take care of business in those 5 games in which they will be favored, well, then you've done almost all the work you need to do. You still got UConn on the back end. You still got Pitt, Boston College on the back end. I think that Syracuse, in terms of the roster, has already shown what they're able to do in terms of utilizing the transfer portal, where Fran Brown, coming from that Georgia staff, has established relationships all throughout the East Coast, both in the South and in the Northeast, where Fran Brown is from, to be able to tap into some unique opportunities to bring more talented players from places like Texas A&M, Fadil Diggs coming in to join that defensive line. So I think that while Fran Brown is not going to be in the college football playoff, I think that because of that schedule and what has been done in the offseason, Fran Brown has a good chance to get Syracuse to a place where Syracuse fans can feel like, okay, our program is in good hands. We're headed in the right direction. So I think that schedule sets up well for Fran Brown. Well, coming up on the other side, we again turn our attention to week 0. Very simple question. We've all got some nominations. Who will be the biggest star of the weekend? We'll explain next. Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. So every week 0 and every week 1 is going to have some overreactions. If you are a star in your game, in a standalone spot like this, we are going to think that you are the best player to ever play college football. So we're going to get ahead of the overreactions right here because I want to know, and Tom, let's go to you first. Who do you think is going to be the biggest star of week 0 in college football?
Yeah, we talked about earlier in the show, we think that SMU is going to have a pretty easy go of it against Nevada. So I'm going to go to the Mustangs to find my star of week 0. I'm going to go with running back Jalen Knighton, who led the Mustangs in rushing last season. And I think that once they build that lead, they're going to keep handing the ball off to him as the game goes along. And it will be a good decision because Nevada was not very good at anything last year. But defensively, specifically, they had a real hard time stopping the run. In fact, the yards they allowed before contact ranked 131st nationally. And if you can't get hands on Jalen Knighton early, you're not going to get hands on him late. So I think he's going to have a big game. He's going to go for at least 150 yards. And I'm going to say 2 or 3 touchdowns.
Ooh, Tom and Bud simpatico right here because Bud also targeting that SMU offense. Who do you have your eyes on, Bud?
Chip, I've got R.J. Maryland, the SMU tight end, son of former NFL great, Miami great Russell Maryland. This guy is a freaky athlete. Last year as a freshman, tight end's not an easy spot to play as a freshman. 34 catches, 500 yards, 7 tutties. I expect him to really continue this year. I think he's one of the best players in the ACC, and SMU is lucky to hang on to him.
Yeah, Jalen Knighton, former Miami Hurricane. You've got the son of a former Hurricane. Rhett Lashley just been hitting that button to be able to keep from, because remember, former offensive coordinator for the Hurricanes. He's been able to keep that alive. Danny, you are targeting a Noel. No surprise. But a newer Noel, somebody who joined the team this past offseason, who do you think is going to be the biggest star for Florida State coming out of the weekend? I
am going to go with one of the many Alabama transfers that transferred over to Tallahassee and go with Roydell Williams. You guys gave a lot of cute, little potential targets to potentially watch on our network, playing the role of company men. But I'm going to go ahead and say it's going to be on the biggest game of the weekend on the biggest stage, and a game that could get them down to the fourth quarter. We shall see. But Roydell Williams, I think, is going to be the featured back for Florida State. They want to establish the ground game. They want to take some of that pressure off DJ Uyunglele. I think they do. I think Roydell goes for over 150 and has multiple touchdowns on the ground.
Okay. Over 150 for Roydell Williams. I'm going to go with the tie because it's the idea that we're going to put these two players in the same conversation for why Florida State's defense is so terrifying to throw the ball against. I'm going with the pass rushing duo of Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones Jr. I think they are going to absolutely feast. And to throw back to something that Bud said earlier, game script. If Georgia Tech is trailing, and Georgia Tech is throwing Haynes King back there and finding 3rd and long situations, and the wide receivers can't get open because of lockdown defensive backs, well, that means that it is going to be feasting time for the duo of Patrick Payton and Marvin Jones Jr. So I think that we're going to come out of this. We're talking quarterback hurries, sacks, tackles for loss. So I think it's going to be a big one for the pass rushing duo from Tallahassee. All right, Tom, before we get out of here, quick shout out.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to some of our biggest fans. I know they have been watching us every single week. We've been on CBS Sports Network. Hello to everybody at the Swigwam Beach Bar in St. Pete Beach down in Florida. Thank you for watching. I hope you're enjoying the show.
Let's go. Hey, we have probably got some Knowles in the house there. They got to love that we gave Florida State some love. So 100%. We appreciate all y'all for hanging out. This is not the only place that you catch the Cover 3 podcast. No. We are live at youtube.com/Cover3 every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time is where we give our locks, our picks for the upcoming weekend. It is appointment viewing for so many. We hope you join us as well. And, of course, you can download the Cover 3 podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For Tom Fornelli, Bud Elliott, Danny Cannell, I'm Chip Patterson. Thanks for watching the Cover 3 podcast on CBS Sports Network.